I'd like to thank you guys for joining us today and tuning in to this technical session about ArcGIS StoryMaps. Our topic today is getting started with the new story builder. So by way of introduction, we are product engineers on the ArcGIS StoryMaps team. In the technical session today, we have Arvin, my name is Joseph, and we're also joined by Sarah. So to start with, let's review some of the objectives for this technical session. Primarily, we want to introduce the new ArcGIS StoryMaps and give an overview of the story authoring tool, which we call the Story Builder. And our goal here is really to equip you with the knowledge and resources you'll need to start telling your own stories, with some tips and tricks sprinkled in. So, to get started, what is ArcGIS StoryMaps? Well, StoryMaps is a story authoring and web-based application on the ArcGIS platform that enables you to share your maps in the context of narrative text and other multimedia content. You can use ArcGIS StoryMaps to do things like the following. You can, of course, author stories and collections, and these stories can include things like maps, narrative text, lists, images, videos, embedded items, and other media. Once you've authored a story, you can publish and share these stories both within your organization and to a broader worldwide audience. And the tool also comes with management capabilities that allow you to keep up to date with previous stories that you've authored and change settings at any time. The history and background of story maps is really interesting. The first story map template was introduced back in 2012 with the basic story map template. And this template gave authors on the ArcGIS StoryMap or the ArcGIS platform an opportunity to put a little bit of context around the maps that they had been authoring with a simple narrative text panel and the ability to configure pop-ups. The popularity of that first template drove the introduction of a half dozen more templates over the next few years, including some popular ones like Story Map Journal and Cascade. In the summer of 2019, Esri introduced the next generation of storytelling on the ArcGIS platform with the new ArcGIS StoryMaps. This new next generation version of StoryMaps combined the best features of the classic templates into a modern and flexible authoring and reading experience with a mobile-first design and with constant updates of new features and capabilities. So that kind of begs the question, what kind of stories are people telling with the new ArcGIS StoryMaps? We'd like to share a few of the ones that are our favorites, starting with one that was authored by a nonprofit called NatureServe. Now, NatureServe is a nonprofit organization that's focused on providing scientific resources for effective conservation action. And what we're seeing here is the cover of that story. One of the things I really like about this is their use of a video to kind of set the mood and set the tone for what they then dive into here in their narrative text, which is an introduction to their story with narrative text followed by this really attractive gallery of images that highlight some of the biodiversity that their organization was mapping. The author of this story then included their map of the biodiversity importance in the United States. And as the reader, we scroll through this story and it zooms to specific locations that the author wants us to focus on.
Great story, Joe. I really like how NatureServe used captivating maps and other media to tell their story about the importance of biodiversity. Another story I found really interesting is The Voices of Grand Canyon by the Grand Canyon Trust. These storytellers talk about their connection to the Grand Canyon and how that ties to their culture, work views, and livelihoods. As we scroll through, we can see they use immersive blocks with large media and quotes, a floating text layout with media on the left and text on the right, and embedded audio to bring their story to life and engage readers. We'll talk more about how they did this throughout the presentation. Next up is Arvin to show you a story about smoke jumpers.
Thanks, Sarah. I really like stories that teach me something new that I didn't know. And one of my favorite stories recently is the narrative about smoke jumpers from US Forest Services in Missoula. In collaboration with Esri, they crafted a visually compelling story with images, videos. And right here you can see they start off a story with a bang and have this powerful audio that really shows us what they do day to day. And as you scroll through the story here, you'll find that they go through their background, the history of their profession, and with the help of powerful images and videos in there. And as you scroll further, you'll see that they incorporated the different layouts within the same story to talk about how the different federal lands and areas that they operate in with the help of ArcGIS web maps. And as you scroll through the story, they employ different tricks and tips that we'll show you later as to how visually compelling the story is. So if you have a chance, do check that out. And by the way, if you took a look at the header in the story that we're presenting today, you'll notice that it's a little different from the story header. And that's because we are presenting all of this to you with the new collections that we've added to ArcGIS StoryMaps recently. They're a quick and easy way to group stories and apps together based on a common theme or narrative and present them together. So stay tuned about this. We'll talk a lot more about how you can create and share them later. So getting back to stories, this is a quick way or a bird's eye view of how you can see stories that you've created, you've favorited, or stories that were shared with you by members from your organization or other organization groups that you're part of. Simply clicking any of these stories launches the new builder. But for today's session, we would like to share a story with you that we've all been working on, which is documenting World Heritage Sites that UNESCO has classified that are in danger. So we have the story here. Every story begins with a private draft that you will begin working on. And stories are created and authored by adding different types of content blocks. The very first content block in the new story builder is the cover. And we've already shown you the importance of the story cover in some of the examples before. They are the first impressions your readers have when they visit the story. So having a compelling one is pretty important. And as you see here, we've gotten some of the information about the story filled out. We've gotten a good working title and description. And I really like that I can change the name of the byline here. So you'll see that it's a little empty. I'm going to go ahead and credit the entire team that I'm working with as part of the story. And then I'd like to spruce up this cover a little bit. So let me go ahead and add some media to it. So I'm adding an image, and I can pull in something that's relevant to the story that I'm authoring. And one thing that I really like is the ability to adjust the focus of the image by just deciding where to focus on it. So my readers can see what the subject of the image is. And I can also go ahead and add some alt text for accessibility to my audience who use screen readers. Great, so we've now got that set up. We can customize this cover even further by using the design panel in the new builder. And there are a lot of different options that we provide. The thing that I want to focus on here is the cover section. By default, this cover uses the side-by-side layout. As the name implies, it separates the story info from the media. If I switch to the minimal layout, it focuses on the story info more and makes the media sort of a banner. But I can also choose to go back and make that a full cover layout, and that really makes my story immersive. And I can also choose to position this differently by moving the image and the text to the top. So great, we've spent a lot of time making sure our readers stay on this story. Now I'll hand it over to Sarah, who will tell you how you can build your story from there.
Thanks, Arvind. So story maps are and have always been a way to bring your story to life using a variety of media content like images, videos, and of course maps and scenes, and this has not changed. The unified builder allows you to mix and match content blocks, layouts, and narratives all in one place. Now let's dive into authoring a story. The block palette allows you to add different content blocks to the story. From here, you can add text, images, videos, and special blocks we call immersives. You'll see all those come to life as we build out the story. Here, we have some text that has already been added to the story. Clicking and highlighting the text brings up the rich text editor. With the rich text editor, I can change the formatting or convert between block types. For example, let's convert this paragraph text to heading. With the design panel, I can also choose to adjust my fonts if I choose. I've already added an image into my story and can quickly adjust the size using the media toolbar depending on how much I want to emphasize the image. Here, I like to use the float option, which automatically wraps my text around the image. As I scroll down, I see that one of my colleagues has added a link to a YouTube video, but there's a more engaging way to show this in the story using the video block. Again, I'll use the block palette to bring in a video from YouTube. Arvin will now talk to you a little bit more about how to embed web content into your story.
Thanks, Sarah. This seems like a perfect spot to talk about the same media toolbar that Sarah just mentioned to you before. Images can be resized, as you saw, to different options, and the same is true for video blocks and embed blocks as well. But when you add in a content that uses a URL, we provide other options so you can choose how to display them in the story builder. So as you see all the way to the left, you have two options. What's default enabled is the ability to show your content as inline so your readers can interact with it. You can also choose to show the same video as a card, which pulls in all the information from YouTube, such as the title, description, and a link to it. Your readers can click on it and open in a new tab to interact outside of the story. So it's up to you how you want your authors to work with it. Similarly, we support so many different types of services.
That's great that you can embed things like tweets, websites, images, videos, but what about bringing in sound like we saw in the Grand Canyon story?
That's right, that's a really good question. We support more than 500 different services in StoryMaps. This includes different types of audio, video, and rich content providers out there. You can leverage them all using the embed block from the block palette. So let's go ahead and see how you can do that. So in this specific cases, one of the services I want to highlight is a tweet that I want to bring in from Twitter. I already have the URL to it. When I click on the embed from the block palette, I can paste that URL in. Just before I do that, one thing I want to mention is you can paste in a URL, or you can also paste in an iframe code to any of the web content you want to bring into your story. So in this case, once I go ahead and add it, we choose to automatically display this content in a very smart way. We fix the content size and position for you within these stories. And just like the video that you saw before, you can choose to also display it as a simple card, which pulls similar metadata information from Twitter. So continuing on with this specific story, I would like to have my readers learn a little bit more about how UNESCO uses their selection criteria to deem what is a World Heritage Site. For that purpose, I'll add the URL to their webpage using the embed block that I see right before me. So if I go ahead and click on the embed and paste the URL in, we'll automatically bring in the entire website for you. And I can also click to interact on it. So my web page becomes active and I can start scrolling through the story. But wait, what is this new layout that I'm seeing here? Joe, can you help me out here?
Yeah, so you may have noticed that Arvin showed how embeds work in one of the immersive blocks called Sidecar. Before we go any further, it would probably be helpful to introduce the immersive blocks: Sidecar, Slideshow, and Guided Tour. So first off, what is an immersive block? Well, immersives are a special kind of content block that fill the display and focus on specialized media and narrative panels. Each kind of immersive block is composed of slides that follow a standard layout that can emphasize different kinds of content. This is a sidecar. The sidecar layout includes a large media panel that is stationary or docked, next to a smaller narrative panel that scrolls. One of the really great things about the narrative panel in a sidecar is that many of the content block options that are available in the main story are available here as well. We have all of the different narrative text options, as well as buttons, separators, images, videos, and embeds. Really, the only thing that we can't add in here is another immersive. As a user scrolls through the narrative panel, the media panel stays docked until they get to the end of the narrative, and then we seamlessly transition to the next slide. We can see all of the slides in this story builder by opening up the slide panel at the bottom, and we can see now that there are 3 slides in this sidecar. As I scroll through the second one, the third one will come on, and we'll talk a little bit more about how this map choreography works at a later time. The second immersive is called Slideshow. In a slideshow, the media takes front stage as it fills the entire display with a small floating narrative panel on top. This narrative panel is somewhat restricted compared to Sidecar in that it's limited to both a title and simple narrative text without the ability to add images or other content block types. Readers navigate through the slideshow by clicking the arrows on the side for a horizontal scrolling effect. And just like in Sidecar, we can add images, video, and maps.
Hey Joe, that's all really great, but it looks like that narrative panel is covering the camels. Is there anything we can do about that?
Oh yeah, for sure. We don't want to cover up the camels. One of the great things about the floating panel in a slideshow is that we can use these arrows to change their positions. We can also change the panel style. It's by default themed with a solid background, but we can also change to a transparent text style with white text or a transparent style with darker text. I think that looks a lot better. What do you think, Sarah?
Looks good.
Excellent. Let's take a look at the final immersive block that we have. This one is called Guided Tour. In Guided Tour, each slide consists of a map location and a corresponding floating narrative panel that includes a place, the name, description, and media. As the reader scrolls, the map focus transitions from place to place. So we can see that we moved from Easter Island here to an island off the coast of Portugal. And as I scroll further, we're taken to the Everglades National Park in the United States.
The map-focused layout is great for locations that are geographically connected, but for this story, I'd like to focus it on my images and media instead, so I'll go ahead and select the media-focused layout. Don't worry, this won't require any rework. It's easy to switch back and forth.
That's a great point. If we were using a classic template, we would be starting over from zero. But with the new Story Builder, we can come into the settings on the slide panel and go to change layout. And from here, I can select media focused instead of map focused. And now we have media taking front stage and the map moves up to the upper left-hand corner. You wanted to add a new spot?
Yeah, let's show how easy it is to continue building our tour by bringing in media and adding it to the map. For my next tour point, I want to show Machu Picchu. I'll click Add Location, search for it, and add it to the map. You'll notice that there's an option to add a custom zoom level to the map. Since I want my tour to zoom to this location, I'll go ahead and toggle that on and place. Finally, I'll add my media and some information into the narrative panel.
Great, that's looking a lot better.
Awesome. So it looks like immersive blocks seem really easy to create, and what a great way to tell a narrative. But let's take a detour back to the content blocks in the block palette. And one of the most powerful content block in ArcGIS StoryMaps, as the name implies, is all the powerful ArcGIS mapping capabilities that come with the platform. You can add a 2D or 3D ArcGIS map into your story by simply using the block palette and selecting the map block. You can use this map browser here to select web maps and scenes that you've authored, you've favorited, or that were shared to you by your members. You can also choose to bring in content from the living atlas of the world. So for this story, I'll go ahead and select a web scene from my organization that I've already favorited, the Heritage in Danger, and clicking it opens this map designer. So let's take a moment here to walk through all the different things we can do with this web scene to make it stand out in our story. First, I can change the layer visibility to either show or hide. And I can also change the name of the layer from this layer panel. So let me go ahead and remove some spaces here.
I'm going to add some spaces, make it a little bit more readable.
Yeah, it looks like the publisher hurried through the publishing process. Okay, and I can also use existing bookmarks from the web scene that were saved as part of it. So let's select one that highlights a heritage site. And you'll notice it uses the proper animation and zoom in controls. Now, let me use the scene controls to adjust how readers can see this and make it look much better. Yeah, that looks much better. Okay, now let's add the scene into our story. So this workflow is pretty similar to how you add web maps and also living atlas content inline in your story. But immersive blocks, which we talked about earlier, are more effective when used with web maps and scenes, as they allow authors to create a logical sequence of related map and scene views. So let's go back to that sidecar above and see how all of this works. One of the powerful abilities of immersives, as Joe explained, is to transition from one slide to another, and we provide that transition for you when you create a new slide. And sometimes these slides can contain different types of media, as you saw before, but you can also sometimes want to reuse the same content in those different slides. And you can do that by duplicating a slide that contains any content in it. So in this specific case, when I duplicate a web map or scene, I can choreograph the map, so to speak, by changing the map's content by either adjusting layer visibility or changing its geographic focus by adjusting its extent. In this sidecar, you'll notice as I scroll from one slide to another, the map's extent changes to focus on Asia. And I can, as you notice, if I continue to add more, I can gradually zoom into a different study area if I so wish by duplicating this map again in a new slide and continuing my narrative on. What we've shown you so far is a linear reading experience where your readers are experiencing the narrative that you've set for them. But sometimes you want to keep that open-ended and have the reader choose their own adventure in the sidecar. For that purpose, we introduce you map actions, which are configurable toggle buttons that you see in that narrative panel right there. When you have a web map or scene in the media panel, you can then add this to a sidecar. And when a reader selects the map action, the appearance of the map changes. Let's see how easy it is to create a new action in the same sidecar here. When I create a new action from the block palette, I can choose the map action. And by default, it shows the map's initial state without any of these changes. So I'd like to call this a reset action, more or less. And in order to configure a new action, I can edit it. And that opens up that familiar map designer that we talked about earlier, right? And so here, I can really change the visibility of the layers by toggling off all sites and turning on the natural sites in the map. And just to make sure that my readers feel like the map had some motion to it, I'll zoom in a little bit into India. And once I'm done, I can save this specific action back to the button by clicking Save Action. Now when I click on the map, since it's active, you'll notice that it toggled the layer on that I wanted and zoomed to that extent. But as I click on different action buttons, you'll see how that effect changes. I can go on and on about our ArcGIS mapping capabilities, but I'll hand it over to Sarah, who will now introduce you to something brand new in the ArcGIS StoryMaps builder.
Great. So Arvind highlighted how we can use the power of ArcGIS to add geographic context to a story. But one thing we've heard from storytellers is they need the ability to create simple maps. For example, reference maps, locator maps in minutes. We're excited to introduce Express Maps, a new map-making tool which allows you to create these maps directly from the builder. Here, we have an Express map highlighting some of the threatened UNESCO World Heritage sites. Let's go in and edit this map. When creating an Express map, you'll notice a variety of drawing tools available to you from the drawing toolbar. This is the heart of the Express map authoring process. Use it to add points, lines, areas to your map as needed. It also includes helpful annotation tools for labeling the map directly and arrows that can be curved to fit your exact needs. You can customize your Express Map pop-ups using the Map Designer. I'll go ahead and search for Machu Picchu. Add it to the map. And in the Layer panel, add an image and information. In the Layer panel, you can also change the color of your drawing features or choose a different base map. One of my favorite things about Express Maps is the option to add curved arrows. Here, I'll use the arrow to highlight a trip from Machu Picchu to Timbuktu. Give it a little curve. I'll add an annotation to highlight the point. You also have the option to drag out leader lines from the annotation text by grabbing the handles at the top or bottom of the text box. We've heard a lot of questions from people about the difference between web maps and Express Maps. As Arvind showed, you can still bring powerful web maps from ArcGIS Online in your organization. Express Maps are different because they're created right from the builder and live within the story they're created in. We've seen our storytellers use Express Maps for a variety of purposes, such as highlighting different locations at an event, trips and vacations, flight plans, hikes, and more. So now that we're done editing this Express map, we'll go ahead and place the map.
Great. So at this point in our story, we have configured our cover to be both engaging and beautiful. We've completed all of our narrative text, added a number of immersive slides, as well as some quality web maps, web scenes, and an Express map. At this point, the story is just about finished, but there's a few final things we'd like to do before we're ready to publish and share it out. The first thing we'd like to do is down at the bottom in the credit section. It's important to include a credit section to give credit where credit is due. And in this case, much of the text that we received came from our colleagues, Cooper and Hannah, and data came from UNESCO. So those have been added into the credit section here. However, I feel like we've put a lot of work into this, and I want to make sure we're recognized for our contributions as well. So I'm going to add another slot here for authoring, and I'm going to attribute Arvin, Sarah, and Joe. And because I like to keep things alphabetical, I'm going to use the drag handle here for this content piece, as we see in many other places in the Story Builder, and I'm going to drag this up to the top of the credit section so that we get the prominence that Arvin feels we deserve. Another thing that I'd like to point out here is that the text in the credit section, as in many other places in the story, has the ability to be configured to be bold, italicized, hyperlinked, or we can even change the color. With our credit section in place, we're ready to put our final finishing touches on this story. Going back to the design panel, we now have the opportunity to look at themes. So previously, Arvin was able to show us some of the options that are available for covers, and Sarah pointed out that we can always change the font pairings to match more specifically to the look and feel of our story or to match our organizational requirements. However, one of the things that I find most interesting about story maps is the ability to quickly change the look and feel of the story with one-click themes. By default, stories are authored in a light theme that we call Summit. But with one click, we can dramatically change the look of this story by giving it a darker background, striking red accented colors, and even changes to the font pairings that are used and the shapes of these buttons. Other themes include Ridgeline, which has a more natural feel and uses a terrain base map for the Express maps, and Mesa with its muted colors and striking accent color. At any point, I can change both the accent colors, which is reflected here in the buttons, the annotations in my web map, and also in separators, as well as the font pairings. So I may find that while I prefer this color scheme, I prefer the Clint and Reelhead for my font pairings. Another finishing touch is to add my organizational logo to the top of my story in the header. I can do that from the design panel as well by selecting Upload Logo, selecting the logo, and then adding in a URL, storymaps.arcgis.com, and alternative text for screen readers. With those finishing touches in place, I'm ready to preview this story to get a better idea of how this will look to my readers. In the header, I can select Preview, and I'll get a real view of what this will look like when the story is published. One of the great parts about this preview is the ability to see what this looks like on multiple different devices. Selecting Preview on desktop lets me see what this will look like rendered on a desktop browser. I can also see what this might look like on a tablet or on a mobile phone, which is really important because so many of our readers are accessing and looking at these stories on their mobile devices. Once I'm satisfied that this story matches the look and feel and the experience that I expect, I can return to the Story Builder and publish my story. When I select Publish, I have the option to decide who the audience will be for my story and who will have access to see it. By default, stories are published privately so that only you can see them. However, I can select to publish to other people inside my organization, or, depending on the audience, I can share this to everyone in the public. Alternatively, if I belong to a group and have the correct permissions, I can share these to inside of groups. For this story, I want everyone to be able to see it, so I'm going to select everyone and click Publish Story. As the story publisher runs, it checks to make sure that the maps and scenes that have been shared will be viewable by all of the readers in my selected audience. In this case, I have the option now to change the Heritage and Danger web scene that Arvin added so that my readers will be able to see that as well.
Uh-oh, that's my bad, Joe. I should have shared this publicly.
It's shared publicly now.
Cool.
It says, nice work. I think we've made a good story. After the story is published, we get to see it in the read view or in the viewer mode. And because I shared with everyone, I have some options in the top of the header to share this story on popular social media networks, such as Facebook and Twitter. There's also a quick and easy link to copy the story URL for sharing in other channels, such as email. In some cases, authors want the ability to take their stories offline. So through this print dialog, we can print stories as well as save them to PDFs for archival purposes.
Perfect. So let's take a moment to recap all of that. We showed you how you can author a new story and add a series of content blocks to it and immersive blocks. You can then design that story to fit the tone and style you're looking for. And finally, you're ready to share this and publish the story with the audience of your need. So we've seen how easy and important it is to share your work with whomever you like. But story authoring and sharing isn't alone a part of ArcGIS StoryMaps experience. We've introduced a new feature called Collections. And Collections is a quick way to group stories and apps together, and you can share and present them as a cohesive and navigable set. You'll find the user experience for the most part for authoring collections and stories to be pretty much the same. I've already started working on a collection here that I would like to add related stories and ArcGIS apps to highlight World Heritage Sites in Danger. I've got a cover title and some description. Let's go ahead and add some items to this collection. Opening the Add Item button gives you this browser which allows you to search for stories and apps that you've created, favorited, or were shared with you. So let's select that story that we just published, and then let's switch over to apps to select a web app builder app that I just made to highlight heritage sites that are near readers using the Near Me widget. So once I'm done, I can go ahead and add this to a collection. And so now that I've added all the content similar to stories, I can now get ready to publish this collection and share it with my audience. When I click on the Publish dialog, you'll notice that it's very familiar with how we just published a story just now. So let's go ahead and select everyone because I want all of my audience to see this, and then publish that. What's interesting about collections is that it has two types of views. This is called the overview, which lists all the items your collection has and allows your readers to quickly see the contents of the collection. But I can also either click on a specific collection or click on the Present button, and it opens a presenter view. And this view allows your readers to navigate between these different items if they choose to do so. And in this specific case, this is the Web App Builder app, and my readers can interact with the app and search for heritage sites that are near them. So with that, we're nearing the end of our session here today. So I'll hand it off to Joe, who will now walk you through what you should take away from our session today.
That's great, Arvin. I can't wait to find a heritage site near me. So at this point, we've talked a little bit about the background and history of ArcGIS StoryMaps. We introduced the story map builder, going through both the cover and all of the options that are available in the content block palette. We talked about using different immersive blocks. We talked about using maps and slides. Arvind just took us through how we can then bundle different stories and ArcGIS apps into collections. And at this point, we'd like to share with you some of the resources that we've collected that are most helpful for both novice users and veteran StoryMap authors as we wrap up this session. So the first thing that we'd like to highlight is the ArcGIS StoryMaps resources website. If you go to the StoryMaps website on Esri.com, you'll find this great resources page that's constantly being updated with materials and content that is specific to building up the skill set for authors with story maps. Some of our favorite links from the resources page include the Getting Started with ArcGIS StoryMaps blog, the 9 Steps to Great Storytelling, followed shortly by How to Make an Awful Story Map, and a really great document that walks through outlining called Planning and Outlining Your Story. Aside from the great resources on that page, we also curate a playlist on YouTube that's constantly updated with new videos that highlight different features of story maps and walk through different workflows that are popular for storytellers. Every time we release a new version of ArcGIS StoryMaps, it's accompanied by a blog that is posted to the ArcGIS blog. If you're interested in staying up to date with the new things that are happening on ArcGIS StoryMaps, we highly encourage you to check the ArcGIS blog regularly. This is where we will highlight all of the new features that are available, as well as other enhancements and fixes that are coming with each release of ArcGIS StoryMaps. For authors that are interested in getting a more detailed description of the features and capabilities of ArcGIS StoryMaps, we have thorough product documentation that includes all of the specific capabilities and system requirements of the product, as well as an informative frequently asked questions page that's frequently updated with new information. Esri's training department offers a number of tutorials and training courses that are specific to workflows and processes for authoring in ArcGIS StoryMaps. These include authoring and publishing your first story, the ArcGIS Learn lessons, and of course the catalog of training courses found on training.esri.com. As we're getting close to the end, we want to talk a little bit about what's coming up next for ArcGIS StoryMaps. We're really excited to be able to share this with you because there's been a lot of interest from the community about what we can expect next now that we've added in all of the things that existed in the previous classic templates. So some of the things that we can expect in the near future include bookmarks, audio inline, tabbed layout for collections, and cascade style immersives.
Hey Joe, don't forget that custom themes people have been asking.
Custom themes are on their way as well. We just want you to note that the dates and features here are subject to change, but we're committed to continuing to enhance story maps as we move forward, and we're really excited about what the future holds. Another really important thing for people that are just getting started with story maps is understanding what they'll need to get started, and that includes getting an ArcGIS account that has permissions to use story maps. You can find out more about the different user types and licensing options on our pricing page. One of the things that we're most excited about is a new user type called Storyteller that's specifically for people inside of an organization, an ArcGIS organization, that want to tell stories but don't need to be authoring story maps or don't need to be authoring web maps or using other apps inside of that ecosystem. So if there's people inside of your organization that want to use this tool but don't need access to the other parts of ArcGIS Online, Storyteller may be the right fit for them. This resources story is available publicly, and you can find it by visiting our Twitter handle at ArcGIS StoryMaps. We look forward to seeing you there, and thanks for joining us today.